Good morning. Welcome back to a new class. Today we'll be looking at diabetes type 2. This is a very chronic condition that affects a lot of people across the world. Specifically, we're looking at type 2 today. Type 1 is a more complex condition. We'll probably look at that in the future sometime. It's a lot to do with genetic, and there's some diseases in this world that you can't really recover because you're born with it. So type 1 is one of those conditions. So it's really hard to actually treat it. But type 2, because it's a lifestyle disease, because it is formed or it emerges in your body after a period of time, you can reverse it, you can manage it, and you can basically recover from it, conquer it. So we'll look at what diabetes is, how it happens in the body, the current medications or the treatments that are available as per the modern medicine, and also nature. So how does nature look at this condition? What is actually happening in the body? I want you to pay close attention to as I discuss the symptoms, as I understand and break this condition down. Pay attention to the words that I use, specifically insulin and what it's doing, its behaviors, and I'll explain that to you. Firstly, it's a hard condition to understand, but we'll break it down because it's very technical. There are many players involved in this condition. There are many organs involved, and then we'll move on to uncovering the psychological perspective of diabetes and how through psychological change you can recover from diabetes. There are many solutions in terms of diet, in terms of lifestyle, that can help reverse diabetes, but people still are not able to do it. People manage their diets, they work really hard, relentlessly, ensuring that they eat proper food, proper fiber, proper fats, etc., but they still cannot recover from diabetes, even though they have gone the natural way. Their insulin is just less sensitive, and it stays less sensitive, and that's why the cells are resistant to the insulin. They're always in this constant battle, constant conflict of, I'm trying my best, but it's not working. So I'll introduce a new element, a new thought process in between that can intervene and that can really change the way you look at diabetes in terms of psychological perspective. So I'm going to introduce a psychological understanding of why diabetes happens to you and how you can manage it from the mind. So once you have that aspect, because you're doing everything from the body, once you have that aspect with you, the mind aspect, you understand clearly why diabetes is happening, then you can work on both dimensions. You can work on the body, physically you're already doing that, probably working really hard to ensure that you eat healthy. And then you can also work on the psychological level, which will ensure that you have a complete process of holistic healing, essentially. Okay, so let's get started with diabetes. This is a condition where your insulin, which is produced by your beta cells, okay? So you have pancreas, which house beta cells. Okay, it's like a home for B cells. And B cells produce insulin. And what does insulin do? It helps metabolize sugar, glucose in your body. So I know these are kind of hard words to understand at the moment, but I'll clear it up. Metabolize sugar or glucose, as the medical term is, in your cells so they don't float around in your blood. Now, in a normal human being, this is the process. What happens is when you eat food, your carbohydrates specifically, turn into glucose, turns into energy. So the carbohydrates that you eat, they turn into glucose in your body. So when it goes into the stomach, it breaks down the carbohydrates into glucose. And then what happens is to metabolize that glucose, your pancreas, which has beta cells, release insulin. So metabolism essentially is digestion. So when there's glucose in your body, it's roaming around in your blood, okay, it's in your bloodstream. Then for the cells to absorb it, okay, for the cells to absorb the sugar, the glucose for energy, it needs a carrier, which is insulin. So carrier. Insulin is like, let's say you have cells, these are your cells, and this is sugar trying to enter, glucose trying to enter. You need like a key to ensure that the cell opens up, the door. And the key is the insulin. The key needs to be there, otherwise the door will not unlock. It won't unlock, and if it doesn't unlock, then the sugar stays in the blood. For the sugar to be used by the cells, the door needs to unlock and the sugar can go inside the cell, be used for energy. That's how you get energy. That's how carbohydrates is the primary source of energy. is because your cells need glucose. That's why when we have sugar, there's a spike in your insulin levels. There's a spike because that high amounts of insulin will ensure that you have a high metabolism of sugar in your cells. Okay, then you get a blood rush of sugar, and the sugar further goes into the cells and you get energy. So that's the entire explanation of, in a normal person, what happens. In diabetes type 2, insulin is either less produced by the pancreas, okay, so by the beta cells, so there's a decline in the production, or what is happening is the cells are not accepting the sugar for some reason, right? There are many causes for this, which I'll explain to you, but for some other reason, the cells have decided to close the door, shut the door to the sugar, and even insulin is not working. So the inefficiency of insulin, or the resistance of insulin, or the less sensitivity. The more sensitive your cells are to insulin, the more likely the sugar is going to digest in the cell. The less sensitivity there is to insulin, the least likely possibility there is for the sugar to be digested inside the cell. Your sugar needs to enter the cell for you to have energy. These are the two main causes of diabetes type 2, insulin resistance essentially, is cells are rejecting sugar. They're abandoning sugar, they're rejecting sugar, they don't want it for some reason because insulin is insufficient, or insulin doesn't have that capability, insulin has lost its power. Insulin is compromised. Okay, I'm just going to put compromised and less power. Okay, pay attention to the words that I use because we're going to decode it from a psychological perspective. What's happening? The body replicates everything that goes on in your mind. Okay, if there's a loop in your mind, and if you keep repeating the habits in your mind, whatever you're doing, your cells and your organs, everything in your body replicates that. As above, so below. Then what happens is you have sugar in your bloodstream. So just imagine this is a bloodstream. These are your blood vessels, and these are cells in your blood vessels, blood cells. And sugar roams around. Sugar, glucose molecules will roam around your bloodstream. Okay, and these damages sugar, glucose, if it's in your bloodstream for long periods of time, it will damage your blood vessels. Your kidneys will try and filter a lot of it out, filter the sugar out. That's why you have sweet urine. A lot of ancient practices like Ayurvedic medicine, they detected or diagnosed type 2 diabetes from understanding that when someone urinates, there's ants attracted to the urine, okay? When there's ants attracted to the urine, that means there's glucose present in the urine, which is known as sweet urine. And madhumeha is a Sanskrit term for diabetes, literally translates to sweet honey. That's how they know that you have diabetes, is when they saw ants getting attracted to the urine. First things first, you have kidneys filtering out glucose, so you have sweet urine, you have frequent urination. I'll just write the symptoms. I'm discussing the symptoms of diabetes type 2 now. Okay. So frequent urination. And because of frequent urination, you have increased thirst. Okay. So because there's dehydration. It's all linked together. And there is an increased hunger. Why is there an increased hunger? Have a think. Because your body, increased hunger, because your body is not getting energy. Okay, so your cells, which are over here, rub this out. Your cells, they don't have energy. They don't have glucose. So your body is tired. Okay, there is fatigue as well that comes with diabetes. So your cells are tired because they don't have energy. They don't have glucose. They're like essentially manipulating your body, being like, I don't have glucose, but they're also not accepting the glucose that you're already giving them from the food that you're eating. So the food that you're eating that's not being metabolized, and it's not being used by the cells, but the cells are still compromised of energy, right? So they'll demand energy, okay? So you'll feel more hungry, okay? So increased hunger, increased thirst, fatigue, and frequent urine. And then sugar can also damage your blood vessels. It can pull fluid out of your eyes, so you have vision issues, vision loss, or like a decline in vision. There's tingling and numbness in your extremities, in your fingers and toes. And there's also slow healing of wounds because there is no energy for the cells to actually ensure that if you get a cut or a wound, the cells can go there and heal because they don't have energy. So a decrease in wound healing. So these are the symptoms that come with diabetes type 2. A way to tell that you're going to get diabetes, or that you're gonna, it's a pre-symptom. There are pre-symptoms that your body gives you before the disease fully manifests in your body, which is, in Ayurveda, they call this, when you urinate, if you get goosebumps on your last drop of urination, then your insulin level is actually becoming less sensitive. So I'll repeat it again. When you urinate, the last drop of urination, after that, if you feel goosebumps, it shows that your insulin has become less sensitive. And you'll experience it very instantly. Like, you can try this out if you eat a very heavy, fatty food, almost like fried food. If you eat any, it's a lot, like heavy carbohydrates. And let's say you go to urinate after 40 minutes, after an hour, you'll notice that you get goosebumps. It's very obvious. It's simply because you're, at that time, your insulin is not processing the excessive amounts of fat and carbohydrates that you've just provided, the wrong fats that you have just provided your body. Okay? If you eat healthy, if you exercise well, if you ensure you have good amounts of fiber, etc., protein, healthy fats in your diet, you can always notice that you won't get goosebumps when you urinate, the last drop of urination. So that's one thing to notice. Also, if you get tingling and numbness easily, that's also another sign. You could be prone to getting diabetes, but these are just, again, pre-signs. They don't, it simply means that you need to be aware of what's happening in your body and change. Otherwise, the disease will manifest into the existence. So very quickly, one more time. Pancreas house beta cells. Beta cells produce a hormone called insulin. Insulin ensures that the cells in your blood get energy through the transport of glucose molecules. Whatever you eat, all the carbohydrates that you eat turn into glucose, get transported by insulin, the hormone, into the cells for you to have energy. Now, when you have diabetes, your body doesn't respond to insulin well, so the sugar doesn't get metabolized inside the cell. Okay, pancreas just over here, around, like, it's near the stomach, sort of extends from the stomach over here, and then the liver's over here, and then the gallbladder is just behind the liver, and the kidneys are like on the back, on this side. 2 kidneys on the back. Your pancreas, your kidneys, your liver, all of these are involved in diabetes type 2. When the cells don't respond to insulin well, the glucose is left inside the bloodstream. And over time, it builds up, damaging blood vessels, damaging nerves, etc. Going through the kidneys, you have filtration of sweetness from your sweat. You have changes in your taste, changes in your saliva. Saliva becomes a little bit sweet. It has more odor. You get frequent urination. You get increased thirst. You get increased hunger because your cells don't have energy. And essentially, you get fatigue. There's water that is pulled out of the eyes, fluid pulled out of the eyes, so you get blurred vision, and wound healing slows down. So that's what happens in diabetes, and it's less complex than autoimmune, because autoimmune, you still can't really figure out what's happening. But at least in type 2 diabetes, you can figure out what's happening. You can change in your diet, lifestyle. You can make some changes, but still people don't heal. Why? And that's what we'll uncover today. Now, physically, if you want to understand the causes of diabetes, like I mentioned earlier, it's very simple. It starts with a sedentary lifestyle. Okay, as I was mentioning, the support that you can do to help diabetes. So sedentary lifestyle, obesity, wrong fats, lack of fiber, so low fiber in the diet, high glycemic foods, so basically fast-acting carbohydrates. Okay, so fast-acting. What does fast-acting mean? It simply means junk food, like the French fries that you're going to eat, or the burger that you're going to have, the bread that you're going to have. Essentially, if it's not whole wheat and if it's white bread, etc. There's a shorter digestion time. The shorter the digestion time, the higher the insulin spike. If you have high glycemic foods, they basically fluctuate, or they increase insulin in your body very fast, and they drop it very fast because it's fast sugars. Okay, it's instant sugar, like, for example, like donuts, sweets, etc. Those are fast-acting carbohydrates. That's why when you have diabetes, they usually recommend eating low glycemic index foods, which is your barley, your whole grains, your millets. These foods ensure that there's a sustained levels of energy release in your body, and it doesn't fluctuate like the insulin level. It keeps your insulin stable. The lower on the chart, the more healthier it is. And the higher the glycemic, which is refined carbohydrates, the more you're gonna have insulin fluctuations. Okay, so directly linked to that. Stress is huge. Okay, chronic stress anxiety. Cortisol ensures you hold on to fat. When you hold on to fat, you get obesity. When you get obesity, you're sort of not active anymore. Your muscles become lazy. And when the muscles become lazy, the muscle cells become lazy, your cells become more resistant to insulin. They become less sensitive to insulin. So insulin can't really act because those cells have not been trained. The muscle cells have not been trained to be active. The more activity, the more active lifestyle you have, more movement, more engagement of muscles, the more likely there is for the insulin to be used in those specific muscle cells to ensure that they get energy. It's like an unlock when you're using more of your muscle cells. And then we have nutrient deficiencies. I'm going to put ND. Magnesium, there's almost studies show that 50% of diabetic patients have less magnesium in their body. Chromium, manganese, zinc. Okay, all these nutrient deficiencies can lead to diabetes. Then we have age. Age is a factor. The more you get older, the less active your body gets, and the more insulin is needed to ensure that your cells get the energy from the glucose molecules. Genetics is one. Genetics for every condition is the same. And one thing I want to mention about wrong fats is saturated fats and trans fats specifically. They are a major contributor to diabetes type 2. Also, ensuring that you have enough HDL, because LDL is a major contributor to type 2. The cells become coated with the wrong fat, and essentially the coating on the cell makes the insulin less responsive to the cell, which essentially will lead to diabetes. HDL, if you have good amounts of HDL, okay, HDL, high density lipoprotein, LDL is low density lipoprotein. HDL ensures that LDL gets pulled out from the arteries and goes back to the liver processes it and excretes it from the body. HDL is important. Unsaturated fats is important in diabetes. So things like peanut oil, things like coconut oil is saturated fat, but still good. Things like ghee, organic A2 ghee, mustard seed oil, olive oil, oils that have high density lipoprotein, poly and monounsaturated fats. They are essentially they're healthier for type 2, and they will help lower the bad cholesterol, which is LDL in your body, lower it down, and ensure the cellular coating, the fat around the cells, they get lower. You know the physical causes of type 2 diabetes. This is also another way to find out how you can actually help physically in type 2 diabetes. Be active, reduce your weight, have good fats, more fiber, proteins in your body. Protein is actually it's a catch-22 in diabetes because protein can also affect insulin levels, affect your kidneys filtration, So if you have healthy kidneys, then good amounts of protein is okay. But if your kidneys are compromised, then protein is not usually recommended in diabetes. But moderate amount is always recommended. Good amounts of protein, good amounts of healthy fats, low glycemic index foods, carbohydrates that are like millets, non-starchy vegetables, beans, legumes, even fruits are good. Moderate amounts, fruits are good for diabetes. I know most people, most doctors, most modern medicine, they don't usually recommend fruits, but small amounts is okay because they're easily digestible in your body and be used for energy. Whole grains like quinoa, barley, buckwheat, amaranth. So low glycemic index foods, very important. Lower your stress levels, again, no-brainer. And we'll see how stress actually contributes to why you indulge in food. One thing you have to understand is when you have diabetes, your pancreas is producing more amounts of insulin. Okay, beta cells are producing more amounts of insulin, a hormone, to ensure that the cells can digest the glucose. So there's an overdrive. And over a period of time, the reason why there is a decrease in production is because your pancreas get exhausted. Your beta cells get exhausted, and there's a decrease in insulin production. So if this sustains over a long period of time, your insulin hormone will also decrease, okay? Because there is oversupply in the first place, it will decrease. That's one thing I forgot to mention earlier. But just imagine overcompensation of an organ because the cells are compromised. When we have the body, which is producing and expelling sweetness, glucose, out of the body, because it's excessive amounts of it is in the blood, is there something in nature that does that? And you would find in nature, plants produce sweet nectar, obviously. Flowers produce that to attract bees, wasps, etc. And then if you sit with that and if you understand that, what in nature requires high levels of energy production? There is hummingbirds, there is wasps, and there's ants. Hummingbirds have the highest metabolism rate. Wasps require high amounts of sugar or nectar to ensure they get a sustained flight and they can hunt. And then because ants lift so much more than their body weight, they require immense amounts of energy, again, glucose, nectar. So you would see these insects, birds, consume and ensure that they have a good supply of sugar or nectar. Now, in these creatures, what are some commonalities? The biggest commonality is they're both very protective and combative. So hummingbees are super combative. Wasps are combative. They hunt and they protect their nest, and they protect their colonies as well. And they would do anything. They would sacrifice their life. In fact, they would go to war if someone tries and attack or destroy their colony. Same for wasps, and hummingbirds are very combative. They can dive bomb, they stab, they can fight even other birds even bigger than them. So these are the similarities: combative, super combative nature, and a defensive nature of these creatures. And they are, yes, of course, across all creatures, but the more energy you have and the higher metabolism rate you have, the more you can achieve greater things like fighting a bigger person than you. For example, let's write this down. In nature, we see a combative trait and a defensive trait. And this is high in creatures with higher metabolisms, with more sugar, nectar consumption. So higher blood sugar, you can say, right? And then we have words like compensation and oversupply. Compensation, oversupply. That's what is happening. Your cells are compromised, and there's an oversupply of insulin in your body when you have diabetes. And now, just to mention what modern medicine does, is you have metformin, GLP-1 inhibitors, and all these medications sort of manage blood sugar. They ensure that you're less hungry, so you don't eat often. They ensure that there's a decrease in pancreatic production of insulin. Okay, beta cells become lower so that your body trains itself to use and manage blood sugar from the existing insulin hormone that is already there. But it's only management things, right? Like that's why you have to monitor. You have to have a monitor with you when you have diabetes to ensure that your insulin levels don't fluctuate a lot. Imagine a hummingbird. It has a bee, and then it has to microscopically combat a cell and pierce it so that blood sugar can enter. Okay, this is what insulin is. Now, if we look at ancient civilizations and what they thought about pancreas and insulin and all of these things, in summary, Ayurveda thought of insulin, or they didn't really have the concept of insulin back in the day. Okay, science discovered that the concept came into being after 1921, and before there was no concept of insulin. So the way they understood diabetes, or sweet urine, the condition, in Ayurveda, they see organs or they see tissues in the body as dhatus, and every tissue has its own fire. Fire is transformation. When you put something in fire, when you melt an ice cube, the ice cube transformed into water through the use of fire. Okay, so in stomach there is a jatra agni, which is fire, and it transforms, breaks down the food. Hydrochloric acid is in Ayurveda known as fire. Breaks down food, transforms food into glucose. And same thing with pancreatic fire, with liver fire, with all these organs. They have their own smaller fires that transform things. There's a continuous process of transformation throughout the digestive system. Okay, there's a lot of fire in your digestive system, essentially. And this is why the area is called pitta. Okay, pitta is fire and water. This part of the body where the digestion happens. The upper part is known as kapha, which means earth and water, and there's a lot of phlegm, mucus, and you get all the chest problems. It's a kapha issue. And then you have below the pelvic area, you have vata conditions, which is space and air. So that's how Ayurveda divides us into the different elements in the body, specifically coordinated in that specific area. And basically, in Ayurveda, insulin is seen as a transformative fire that can help the transformation of glucose into the cell. Okay, transporter, transformer, transform. And then we have TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, which looks at the qis of the body. There's the spleen qi. They believe that the digestive system is essentially ruled by your stomach and your spleen. They both have their own qis, which is balance. When there's an obstruction in the spleen chi, the job of the spleen chi is to ensure that there is a transport of food essence into all the tissues in the body. So same thing, tissues is recognized in Ayurveda, same thing in traditional Chinese medicine. There's a transformation of food essence and an absorption into the tissues. Okay, that's the job of the spleen chi. When there's an obstruction in the balance of the spleen, then you have the blood or the food essences traveling around throughout the body, just like there is with insulin resistance. So they both, again, look at transformation and transport. But again, this doesn't really give us why is there an obstruction, why is there an issue in the body. Okay, then we look at Greek medicine, humoral medicine, and Artius specifically understood diabetes as siphon, which was excess of everything. Excess of everything is bad. It represents the idea of moderation. So siphon, this was used as a metaphor for diabetes in the ancient Greek world, which basically signifies nothing in excess, okay, or everything in moderation. So this gives us a little bit of a clue why back in the day people actually called diabetes type 2 a rich man's disease. Overindulgence, overconsumption of fats and sugars, carbohydrates. There is an excess of everything, which, according to Greek philosophy, and then there's a pass-through in the urine. Okay, so there's a loss of everything. You're losing your energy, essentially. You're disrupting your chi, your balance. Overindulgence, we'll write this down, and we'll understand why there's an overindulgence, which is the last piece of this puzzle. It is a very complex condition to kind of crack from a psychological level because there is so much physical evidence of it happening, but we'll understand indulgence. But we'll understand it from all these clues that we have gotten, okay? Combative, defensive, compensation, oversupply, transformation, transport, overindulgence. And we'll piece everything together to understand diabetes from a psychological perspective. Why does a person overindulge? And the answer is because they're stressed. There is a lack of emotional regulation. There is a lack of limbic brain prefrontal cortex use, and also there's a lack of love in their life. And I'll explain to you why. Oxytocin, which we famously discovered last week, and its importance for anxiety, you'd be surprised to see that oxytocin is also important to reduce insulin resistance. To ensure that the insulin becomes more sensitive, you need oxytocin. Why does a person indulge in their life? Food is like their comfort. They're something that they can get pleasure from. Food, when it becomes pleasurable, when there's an overindulgence, leads to issues in the body. So from the outside, if you're not receiving love and being loved for who you are, you'll naturally tend to find love in food. And it's like a pleasure and reward system, right? So you eat something sweet and you get an instant hit of glucose, of dopamine in your body, in your brain. And that creates a loop, and it creates a vicious loop because you always look for love in food. And that becomes a coping mechanism for your stress and cortisol. The reason why you have stress, high levels of cortisol in your life, is mainly because of people around you who are not giving you love. Or one person, the work that you're doing, etc. There's not a amount of love in your life, which is why you're using food as a coping mechanism. By the end of the day, you're tired, you don't really think about long term, right? Your limbic brain shuts down, your decision making shuts down, and impulsivity takes over. Okay, so you become more impulsive to short acting foods. Do you see the link? Like short acting foods, short term thinking. You want an instant supply of energy. You want pleasure. You want momentarily pleasure. And you're not going to eat things like lettuce, carrots, because you're just too tired to eat those. Okay? You don't find pleasure in it. And there's a loop, there's a cycle. When you eat sweet, you become happy. Because you're not getting happiness from your life, you rely on food. That's one of the biggest causes, again, of overindulgence. And it's like a coping mechanism for your brain. And there's irritability because of that. Because you're not getting love in your environment, you become irritable, you become anxious. And these are patterns seen in diabetic patients. They have all these psychological characteristics which makes them rely on food for happiness. And it's very sad. It's actually very sad because You're not allowed to eat those foods when you have diabetes, right? But you indulge in it anyway. At the start, when you don't have diabetes, but you were indulging because of stress, you don't really notice, like, you're going to have diabetes. But once you start getting those symptoms as you age, because there's a long-term loop that gets created, it's like a vicious cycle that gets created, and you keep repeating those habits, it's really hard to break those habits, right? You can't just tell a diabetic person to stop eating the indulgent foods because he or she is prone to eating it. So you have to unlearn pleasure from food. That's the idea, that's the goal. And how do you do that? You make your body safe. You feel safe. You ensure that you have enough love and oxytocin in your life so that your amygdala unlearns fear, unlearns anxiety, and you can have happiness from the oxytocin, which is naturally produced in your body when you're connected with nature, when you're getting love from the people around you, when you're feeling good about who you are. Okay? I want to introduce a new I know this may not make clear sense right now, okay? It may not click, but I'm going to introduce you to a new microscopic analysis of how and what happens in the brain of a psychological what happens in the brain psychologically when they're in diabetes, okay? When a person has diabetes, or when they're going to get diabetes. So first we have emotional trauma or lack of love, which causes stress, which then causes emotional eating, can overindulgence, and then you have physical breakdown. Okay. Now, why this is happening is because your boundaries are being crossed. Have a look at cells and have a look at how the insulin is trying to break through the cell, but it's not able to do it. The cells are not accepting it. And there's a constant blood supply of blood sugar going throughout your body. Imagine that entire scenario. What is happening? You're not setting boundaries. Your brain is not setting boundary. And literally, your body is telling you to set boundaries because of this action. Because of the blood sugar in your entire body, you're forced to eat the good fats, the good carbohydrates, the healthier foods, whole foods. You're forced to eat that. You're forced to set a boundary with indulgence. It's a very esoteric understanding, but metaphorically, if you look at it, poetically, if you look at it, that's what your body is doing. It's teaching you how to not indulge. But the core, the indulgence core, where does it come from? It comes from you not setting boundaries, you not loving yourself, you not standing up for who you are. Boundary setting is when you don't allow other person, people in your life, to walk over you. They respect you for who you are, and they ensure that you're ensuring that good energy is going into your cell. Cells are rejecting your sugars or the sugar that you're eating. Why? Because you're being rejected by reality. You're being rejected by the people around you. The rejection is happening on a subtle level because you're not being respected for who you are. You're not standing up for yourself. You're not putting a boundary that this is what I tolerate and this is what I don't tolerate. When you stand up for yourself, you love yourself, you don't accept bad energy, okay? You don't try and think of it from a cellular perspective, okay, what the cells are doing. And it's so beautiful that the body will literally force you to take action emotionally to regulate you, okay? So the body will teach you how to not indulge by setting a boundary with your eating habits. Because if you don't, then there's so many consequences, right? There's so many consequences. Like I mentioned earlier, in nature, even though there's a lot of sweet consumption by the hummingbird, by the wasp, by the ants, they still are combative. They have the yin and yang, okay? They have the sweetness in nature and they have the combative war, safety, defense mechanism as well. They have to protect themselves. You yourself have to protect yourself from the bad energy around you, from people who disrespect your boundaries, who cross over you, who walk over you. The more you get walked over, the more you don't stand up for yourself. It just shows that you don't love yourself. You're not having enough oxytocin in your body, and hence your boundaries are crossed. When your boundaries are crossed, you get resentment. You build up inner resentment within you, which transforms into inner stress and suppressed anger. And what do you do to mitigate that? What's your coping mechanism? You indulge in emotional eating, okay? So if you have suppressed anger, if you have resentment within you, there is studies to validate that you'll naturally overindulge in dopamine and serotonin, quick hits of dopamine from food. Okay, that's the easiest and the most fastest way to get it, because your environment is not providing that. So you do that with food. The more diabetes you have, the more people walk over you, the more people don't respect you, the more resentment you have in your body, the higher stress you have. The higher stress, the higher cortisol. You compensate that by getting short, impulsive, you do impulsive acts to get cheap dopamine. Cheap dopamine comes from foods and indulgence, okay? And then your body suffers. So restricting your diet, restricting your body is literally teaching you to eat healthier, to set boundaries with the food. But you only do that because your mind thinks in a linear perspective, right? We don't think from an abstract perspective because we haven't been taught how to think from every angle, because that's what you're directed to. But there's other things in your body as well. Your mind is a whole health system in itself. Your mind, your thoughts dictate, your emotions dictate your health. So yes, you can do restrictions and your body's teaching you restrictions, but if you don't work on being loved, getting oxytocin in your life by standing up for yourself, by telling people around you that this is not good, this is not right, that you have to let it out, let your emotions out. Suppressed anger, resentment essentially turns into suppressed anger, okay? Which then you want to feel good. So what do you do to feel good? You eat and you get weight gain, okay? And then you get diabetes, etc. And the one thing to notice is your body, like I mentioned earlier, is excreting sweetness. It's showing that you can love. It's literally, poetically, metaphorically, your body is producing love. It's like excreting it through the waste channels, urine and sweat. It's showing that you're not loving yourself, which is why it's being wasted and excreted through the waste channels, sweat and urine. They should all connect together. If you want to help and heal diabetes, set boundaries so you don't have resentment. When you don't have resentment, your amygdala doesn't fear. Okay, it doesn't fear, it feels safe. And oxytocin, in fact, has been shown to improve the responsiveness of insulin. So your body literally excretes the right hormones at the right time to teach you how to be emotionally. If you sit with this concept of boundary setting, standing up, saying no, you'll realize how it connects with your diabetes. Don't accept the people that don't love you. Move away from them. And you deserve to have a good life. Okay? You deserve to be loved. You deserve joy in your life. Again, people who don't respect you. And if you don't, like, over a period of time, when people don't respect you, you start disrespecting yourself by enabling that behavior. Okay? You enable the behavior of other people around you to disrespect you. Okay? So you have to say no to that. You have to stop that because you love yourself, because you have high amounts of oxytocin in your body, because nature loves you. Love is the unifying force of this entire universe. Okay, and if you can't respect that, you'll essentially get diseases in your body like diabetes. It's a very easy concept and it's a very digestible thing to understand and know, but we don't follow through, right? Because we're stuck in a vicious cycle, right? When you have good amounts of pleasure from your life, you wouldn't need to rely on food. And pleasure, yes, it's momentarily, but long-term happiness and peace comes from the right people in your life. People are the creators and the shapers of your thoughts, of your brain, of your mind. If you don't curate the right people around you, if you don't curate, and if you don't stop people's behaviors, and if you don't move away, and if you don't customize your environment, then you essentially enable bad behavior and a mind that is in a vicious cycle. It's stuck. It's stuck in mud. You're trying to get out. You're not able to. And even if you work hard by eating the right things, if you don't have enough oxytocin, if you don't have enough love because there's emotional distress, and when you come home from a long day, you're stressed, you still get disrespected at home, it becomes hard, right? It becomes hard to keep suppressing your anger, to keep building up resentment. And then your body gets provoked into disease. It manifests into disease. But if you knew how to set boundaries, if you knew how to say no, if you knew that there are consequences, okay, that anything too much in your life, siphon, anything too much leads to a loss of everything. Okay? So this is the Greek philosophy that I leave you with. I hope you enjoyed this session. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you for the next session, which will be on PCOS. Have a great rest of your day.